The heat was stifling. It was Brona Norvok's first time in the water reclamatorium, and if she had it her way, it would have been her last. The air burned her throat with each breath, the metal plating scalding even through the thick soles of her work boots. In the last 10 minutes, sweat had soaked her body glove to salt every inch of her skin, and it seemed impossible that anyone could even work in these conditions, let alone the capering, scrawny fool at her side. Brona wiped the stinging sweat from her forehead with the back of her hand.
Exactly how much longer do you expect this wild grox chase to take?
Only a little further. Just a little further.
The laborer flashed a toothless, apologetic smile.
Patience! I beg you. Honored enforcer, patience.
For the last time, I'm not an enforcer, Brona muttered. Proper enforcers, not lowly factorium guards hired by the overseer to keep laborers in order on their journey from work to the sprawling downhive hab blocks, had better things to do than investigate spurious rumors of stolen rations.
What exactly do you need to show me?
The laborer nodded, almost groveling in his eagerness to please. Brona wasn't a tall woman. No one downhive was. But Hannick barely reached her shoulder. The bones beneath his synth-weave robes as fine as a bird's. If what he had said when he had brought his complaint to the overseer was to be believed, he was a shift supervisor with 10 years of experience. Not many laborers made it a full decade of service in the reclamatorium, which made his wild allegations come as even more of a surprise.
Look! Look! Look!
Hannick pointed a scrawny finger down the passageway, his other hand tugging at Brona's sleeve.
Look, there.
Touch me again, and I swear by the throne I will end you.
Forgive me.
The laborer bowed his head, his rheumy eyes still fixed on the darkness.
But you do see them, right? There.
Brona squinted down the narrow passageway, her eyes acclimatizing to the gloom. 3 robed and hooded figures were attending to the steaming copper pipes that ran alongside the walls.
I see diligent laborers about their business, shift supervisor. Surely that can't be what you've brought me down here to witness.
Yes, but do you see them?
There was a desperate intensity in the little man's voice. Brona shook her head, frustrated, then stopped as one of the laborers had reached overhead, causing the hood to fall back. The contrast with Hannick's fragile frame could hardly have been starker. Where the shift supervisor was skin and bone, the laborer at the pipes was solidly built, her wrists broad and her neck corded with muscle. The fine tattoo snaked across the big woman's face, vanishing into close-cropped pale hair.
They must be stealing the food, honored enforcer.
This time she let Hannick's mistake go uncorrected.
No one could sustain such vigor with our allotted rations.
Should I take that as a complaint, shift supervisor?
Hannick lifted his hand and wheedled out an apology.
No, honored enforcer. I'm grateful for the overseer's generosity. I wish only to see the thieves punished appropriately.
Brona shot a glance down the corridor. The burly laborer had disconnected a section of pipe and was holding up a heavy-looking replacement for her fellows to weld into position.
And how do you know they're thieves? Not just blessed by the Emperor with sound constitution, or buying extra food in the markets,
She knew her question was stupid before it left her mouth. No one had the God Emperor's blessing down here, and the pittance the laborers earned each month after rations and accommodations were deducted would barely have been enough to buy even a single extra meal, let alone enough to maintain the strength she had just witnessed. Either the laborers found a way of conjuring nutrition out of empty air, or the repugnant little shift supervisor was correct. Hannick's toothless mouth was stretched wide into a grin of triumph.
Because I've seen where they hide their stolen goods.
You swear it?
He met her gaze without flinching.
I swear it.
Right then, take me there now.
The door didn't look like much. Just a single sheet of metal set into the plascrete walls of one of the upper gantries. The sort that might have led to an alcove for storing cleaning equipment or machine parts awaiting repair.
They keep their stores here? She asked.
Yes.
Hannick was nodding hard enough that his scrawny neck looked like it was about to snap.
In and out all the time. They must be punished. Honored enforcer. Punished for their theft and for their lies.
The sooner this matter was laid to rest, the sooner she could be out of the reclamatorium and out of Hannick's loathsome company. She put a hand on the door and shoved, and it swung open with a creak of ancient hinges. The closet inside smelt damp, with an undercurrent of decay that the heavy smell of cleaning agents couldn't quite mask. Brona stepped inside and activated her flash lumen, then stopped, her breath catching in her throat. Light was gleaming from an open pair of eyes, staring directly back at her from the gloom. The flash lumen dropped from her hand, the beam casting shadows across the cramped confines of the alcove.
Shite! What is it? What happened?
Nothing.
Brona drew a deep breath and stopped to recover her flash lumen, her heart thudding.
Just a broken servitor, a pile of old junk. If your colleagues are storing stolen goods somewhere in the factorium, it's not here.
Hannick elbowing his way inside the cramped space, his face creasing with disbelief.
That's not possible. They come here all the time, I don't understand.
Something in Brona snapped.
You useless little shit! I've got better things to do than to indulge your workplace squabbles.
She grabbed his coveralls with both fists and shoved him into the bundle of broken mop handles. But instead of meeting the resistance of the wall behind, she encountered only a filthy plastic sheet hung across the empty space. She thrust Hannick roughly to one side and drew back the drape. A gust of warm, fetid air met her face, the smell rank enough to bring bile flooding into her mouth. The space beyond opened up into a cramped passageway filled with pipes and valves that led further into the darkness. She played her lumen beam across the glistening trail of slime, marked with smeary booted footprints. "Close the door," she said, then drew her stub gun and squeezed herself into the narrow passageway between the pipes and the wall. The quality of the light changed as she squeezed her way along the pipelines, turning to an oily gray that only made the shadows deeper by comparison. The heat was close to unbearable now, pressed close around her like a tangible force.
We should go back,
Hannick muttered from behind her, his knuckles bloodless where he gripped a broken mop handle. Brona shook her head. "You've dragged me out this far. I'm not turning back now." But why not turn back? It would be the easiest thing in the world to retrace their steps, for Brona to report to the overseer that nothing had been found to substantiate Hannick's allegations, and for the shift supervisor to receive his allotted punishment. But her curiosity was piqued, and the thought of returning to the endless monotony of her shift was an unwelcome one. Here, she had almost felt like the enforcer that Hannick had mistaken her for. Here she could imagine her actions had meaning, something that might grant her the merest modicum of favor in the God Emperor's sight. Ahead, the source of the dim light became apparent, as the passageway opened up onto a grid of gantries suspended above one of the manufactorium's enormous tank rooms. Pipes swarmed down from overhead, discharging freshly purified water into an open-topped steel tank that was large enough to hold a small hab block. Overspill from the pipes fell in glittering waterfalls, like a benediction. She tilted her head upwards to wash the sweat from her skin. It would have been easy to miss the little shrine. It had been placed on the gantry overhanging the very center of the room, the glow of its candles warm and welcoming by comparison to the gray light seeping through the dirty glassine roof.
"Don't you have a laborer's chapel?"
Brona asked.
Of course, honored enforcer.
"Then why..."
Brona waved a hand.
"This?"
Her feet clattered on the metal gantry as she moved along the grid of the hanging walkways towards the makeshift shrine. It was made of an old copper vat polished to a gleaming, iridescent shine. She stopped close enough that she could see the gilded reliquary on top, its lid lying open. A prickle of unease ran down her back.
Honored enforcer.
Hanik's silhouette flickered in the corner of her vision. She waved him irritably away.
Wait.
Brona leaned forward. Nestled inside the reliquary lay a skeletal finger, far too large to come from any normal mortal. Shreds of ancient, mummified skin still clung to the discolored bone, and the stench of decay rising from the reliquary lingered in the back of her throat. A puddle of purulent fluid had collected around it and was dribbling through the reliquary's base, down the copper of the shrine, dripping through the gantry's floor, and into the great open-topped vat below.
Honored enforcer, please.
The gantry creaked behind her. Brona turned sharply to see a group of 3 laborers advancing towards her, led by the burly woman she had seen in the lower level.
Come to worship at the grandfather's shrine,
The woman said. Brona took a step back and aimed her stub pistol.
Stay back.
The woman smiled pleasantly and took another step forward. In the light from overhead, what had seemed like health and vigor was revealed as something unnatural, something malevolent. The woman's flesh was doughy and pale, skin stretched tight and gleaming over swollen tissues beneath. What Brona had taken for tattoos on the woman's face were blood vessels, a dull gray green, as though fungal soup was running through her veins instead of blood.
I can't let you stop what we're doing here.
Brona took aim at the laborer on the woman's right and fired, the stub pistol kicking in her hands. The bullet punched a neat hole through the skin right above the man's right eye. He dropped like a stunted grox. The big woman gave a roar of anger, lowered her head, and charged. Brona fired into the woman's chest, once, twice, but the laborer didn't slow. Hanik stepped forward and swung his mop handle into the other laborer's face. The big woman hit Brona like a speeding ground car, driving her into the altar, sending the requillery flying and slamming her into the ground. A brawny hand locked around Brona's wrist and slammed her hand into the ground again and again and again, but she kept her fingers locked tight around the pistol. The cultist's weight on her chest was making it difficult for her to breathe. Brona shoved upwards with her free hand, and her thumb sank into something soft and yielding. The woman recoiled with a shriek, a red jelly seeping down her pallid cheek.
My eye! You bitch! My eye!
The momentary distraction was enough for Brona to scramble to her feet, brought her pistol round again.
Hanik, down!
The scrawny laborer ducked just in time. The bullet struck his assailant in the shoulder. The man staggered back, off balance, and the momentum was enough to take him over the handrail, still screaming as Brona turned her pistol back to the leader.
How many of you are there?
Our name is Legion, for we are...
Brona fired again. The shot hit the woman in the thigh, and she shrieked, a high animal shriek that almost made Brona feel pity for her. Almost.
Not too late. You can kill me. Destroy the holy relic. But the water is sanctified by our grandfather himself. Every laborer in this factorium has drunk his essence. Soon the whole hive will know his blessings.
The woman's gaze darted to the side. Brona followed it to the suppurating finger bone on the edge of the gantry, lying free of its reliquary. Her finger tightened on the trigger, but the cultist was too quick. The cultist's hand had closed around the blasphemous relic, her face lightening with triumph. Then she plunged over the side into the waters below.
Shite!
Brona scrambled to her feet. Hannick, supporting himself on the handrail, doubled over and breathing heavily.
Where does the outflow from this tank go? What does it supply?
The whole factorium.
Hannick's voice was flat.
The workers have been drinking it for months now.
What about the city? Does it drain into the city's water supply?
He shook his head.
No, not directly, no.
Brona leaned her weight on the railing, the metal hot to the touch, her mouth dry. Had she drunk the water since setting foot in the reclamatorium? Uncertainty was an uncomfortable state to be in when a single drop was enough to bring corruption.
Honored enforcer.
Hannick's voice was soft, shorn from the wheedling edge she had come to expect.
I must ask you a favor.
What? He motioned to the stub pistol in her hand.
For the Emperor's mercy.
Brona shook her head.
No. We'll take this to the Overseer. She can...
Honored enforcer.
Hannick managed a resigned smile.
You know what will happen to everyone who works in this place. You and the guards outside may be spared yet, but for the laborers, only death awaits. I would prefer my death now. If you would be so kind.
He closed his eyes, lips moving in silent prayer. Brona searched her thoughts for a prayer of her own, and she cleared her throat.
God Emperor, have mercy on this man, your faithful servant.
For a moment, she would have sworn she saw Hannick's face bathed in light. The pistol's report echoed through the vast, empty halls, and the light died. The image on the screen was grainy and dark, but the figure sitting in the center of the cell was visible enough. A woman, kneeling at prayer. Her head so freshly shaven that the nicks and scrapes on her bare scalp were still clear, despite the low-quality vis-augers. "You're sure this is the one you want, my Lord Interrogator?" the Acolyte said, eyes flicking down at her data slate. "Brona Norvok. She's a simple Factorium guard. If the team needs more muscles, surely one of the Hive Enforcers." The Acolyte's master raised his hand, and the Acolyte fell silent. Tenacity. Courage. A kindling spark of the true faith. She has faced damnation and emerged with her soul unstained, which is more than what can be said for those luckless manufactorium workers whose pyre smoke is filling the air with stench. He rose to his feet and sniffed disdainfully. Have her brought up from the penitentium, and tell the pilot to make the ground cutter ready to depart. Yes, Lord Interrogator. Our newest companion has endured her first test of faith. A hint of a smile crept across the interrogator's face. Let us waste no time in finding her a fresh challenge.